The amphitheater was full that morning, packed from the lowest row to the highest balcony, with students from every corner of the known galaxy. Draythan sat beside Felisari, Gorvon squeezed into reinforced seats next to the slender frames of the Velothi, and somewhere in the middle rows, a cluster of Krathali students let their venomous spines catch the light as they shifted in their chairs. It was the most popular class at the Galactic Union Academy, and everyone knew why. Instructor Kale Vorath stood at the center of the arena-style classroom, his scaled body gleaming under the bright ceiling panels like polished obsidian armor. And when he moved, his claws clicked against the stone floor with a sound that made first-year students flinch. He was tall, even by Draythan standards, nearly 8 feet of muscle and natural plating, and his voice carried through the amphitheater without any need for amplification. Today, he said, sweeping one clawed hand across the holographic display behind him, we rank the galaxy. The class stirred with excitement. This was the lecture everyone waited for. Comparative Xeno-Combat Studies, Session 12, Species Combat Hierarchies. The holographic screen filled with silhouettes of dozens of species, each one tagged with biological data, bone density, muscle fiber composition, natural weaponry, reaction speed, sensory range. Kale began at the top. The Draythan, he said, and he did not bother hiding his pride, are among the most formidable unarmed combatants in the known galaxy. Armored epidermis capable of deflecting low-caliber projectiles, retractable claws that can tear through starship hull plating, and a bite force that exceeds 4,000 pounds per square inch. The Draythan students in the audience sat a little taller. He moved on to the Krathali, praised for their neurotoxic spines that could paralyze most carbon-based life in seconds. And then Gorvon, whose raw mass and bone-reinforced limbs made them living battering rams. Each species got its moment in the spotlight, and each group of students reacted with quiet satisfaction when their kind was acknowledged. Kale clearly enjoyed this, the theater of it, the slow build, the rankings climbing and falling as he made his case for each species. Then, about 40 minutes into the lecture, he reached the bottom of the list. And finally, he said, tapping the display, we come to a species that many of you share this classroom with. A holographic image of a human body appeared on the screen, naked, unadorned, rotating slowly in the blue light. It looked fragile. Humans, Kale said, and his tone shifted, not to cruelty exactly, but to something close to pity. He began pointing at the image with one claw. No natural armor. Their skin can be punctured by a sharpened stick, and their bones, while reasonably dense for a mid-gravity species, fracture under forces that most of you in this room could generate with a casual strike. He tapped the skull. No enhanced senses. Their hearing is limited, their night vision is poor, and their sense of smell is laughable, compared to at least 60% of known sapient species. He tapped the hands. No claws, no venom, no biological weaponry of any meaningful kind. Their teeth are blunt, their nails are soft, and their jaw strength is barely sufficient to chew through cooked meat. A few students laughed, and the sound bounced around the amphitheater like pebbles in a metal drum. Kale let it happen, then raised a hand for silence. Humans, he declared, are evolutionary generalists, brilliant with tools, adaptive in the extreme, and remarkably persistent. But in unarmed combat, they are quite simply among the least threatening species in the Galactic Index. He turned to face the class fully, his amber eyes scanning them. Humans do not fight unarmed. They cannot. They survive by building weapons, not by being one. And if you ever face a human in combat, the only thing you need to worry about is what they're holding in their hands. He said it with such confidence, such absolute certainty, that it settled over the room like a verdict. Most of the students nodded along, and why would they not? The data was right there on the screen, cold and biological and impossible to argue with. In the back row, tucked into the corner where the overhead lights barely reached, a human woman sat perfectly still. Her name was Lena Castillo, and she was 24 years old, 5 feet 7 inches tall, and weighed about 140 pounds. She had brown skin and dark hair pulled back tight, and her hands rested flat on the desk in front of her, fingers relaxed, posture calm. She did not react when the class laughed. She did not flinch when Kale called her species fragile. She just watched, the way someone watches a storm that has not yet reached them. Beside her, Talis Venri, a Felisari student with silver-blue fur and wide amber eyes, shifted uncomfortably in her seat and leaned toward Lena with an expression caught somewhere between embarrassment and apology. "He does not mean it personally," Talis whispered. Lena said nothing. On the holographic screen, the species combat hierarchy glowed in bright ranked columns, and there at the very bottom, listed below species that were literally plants, was a single word: human. Kale was moving on to a discussion of combat pairings and tactical matchups when something made him stop. A hand had gone up in the back row. It was a small hand, steady and unhurried, and it belonged to the human woman who had not spoken a single word in his class all semester. Kale blinked his outer eyelids, then his inner ones. "Yes, Miss Castillo is it?" Lena stood, and the motion was so smooth and quiet that a few students nearby startled, as if she had appeared from nowhere. "With respect, instructor," she said, and her voice was calm and clear, and carried no anger at all. "I would like to challenge that claim." The murmurs started immediately, rolling through the amphitheater like a wave. Kale tilted his massive head, and a slow smile spread across his face, showing rows of teeth that could bite through steel cable. "Challenge it how, exactly?" Lena met his gaze without blinking. "Put me in the ring with anyone in this room. No weapons, no armor, no tools, just bodies." The amphitheater erupted, and for a full 10 seconds, Kale let the noise wash over him, while he studied the small human standing in the back row, with her hands at her sides, and absolutely nothing on her face that looked like fear. Then he laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through the stone floor. "Very well, human. I will arrange an exhibition match for next week, and we will see, in front of this entire class, exactly what soft skin and blunt teeth can do against a real predator." Lena nodded once, sat down, and folded her hands on the desk again. Talis stared at her with wide eyes, and whispered, "You have lost your mind." Lena turned to look at her friend, and for the first time all morning, she smiled, a small, quiet, certain smile that Talis would remember for the rest of her life. "Maybe," Lena said softly, "or maybe he just made the mistake everyone makes." Talis swallowed hard. "What mistake?" Lena looked back at the glowing holographic chart, where her species sat at the very bottom of the combat rankings, and her smile did not fade. "He looked at what we are," she said, "instead of what we can do." The news spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. By the end of that first day, every dormitory hall, every mess hall table, and every study chamber on campus was buzzing with the same story. A human had challenged Instructor Vorath's combat rankings and volunteered to fight anyone in the class, barehanded, in front of everyone. Most students thought it was a joke. The Gorvon students laughed the loudest, slapping their massive hands against tables hard enough to crack the surface, because the idea of a 140-pound human stepping into a ring with any of them was, to their minds, the funniest thing they had heard all semester. The Draythan were quieter about it, but their amusement showed in the way their neck ridges flared whenever the topic came up, a subtle display of superiority that their species had perfected over millennia. By the second day, a betting system had formed on the Academy's informal network. Odds against Lena were so steep that one Krathali student joked it would be more profitable to bet on a rock. Lena ignored all of it. Every morning before the suns rose over the Academy's twin spires, she made her way down to a low-gravity training room on the basement level, a space usually reserved for rehabilitation exercises and light stretching, and she trained alone. She started with breathing, always breathing first, standing in the center of the empty room, with her eyes closed and her feet planted on the cold floor, pulling air deep into her belly and releasing it in slow measured streams until her heart rate dropped and her mind went quiet. Then she moved. Talus came looking for her on the third morning and found her through the observation window, and what she saw made her stop in the doorway and hold her breath. Lena was flowing through a sequence of movements that Talus had never seen before, her body shifting from one stance to another, with a precision that looked mechanical and yet somehow also looked like water, like something alive and constantly adapting. She threw punches at the air that were so fast Talus barely tracked them, then dropped low into sweeping kicks that transitioned seamlessly into rolls and recoveries, and elbow strikes that cut through empty space with a sharp hissing sound. There was no wasted motion. Every movement connected to the next, as if her body was running a program that had been refined 1,000 times over. And the look on her face was not effort or struggle, but something closer to meditation. Calm, focused, completely present. Talus watched for almost 10 minutes before Lena noticed her. "How long have you been standing there?" Lena asked, barely out of breath. "Long enough to be confused," Talus said, stepping inside, "because what I just watched does not match what Instructor Vorath showed us on that screen." Lena grabbed a towel and wiped her. The screen showed biology. It did not show training. That answer sat in the air between them, and Talus felt something shift in her understanding. A small crack forming in the wall of assumptions she had built around the idea of what humans were. Later that evening, Talus did something she had never done before. She went to the Academy's Central Archive and searched for human combat history. She expected to find very little. What she found instead kept her awake until dawn. The records were vast, stretching back thousands of years across hundreds of human cultures, and they described an almost endless variety of ways that humans had learned to hurt, disable, and kill each other, using nothing but their bare hands and bodies. She read about something called Muay Thai, where humans used their elbows and knees and shins as weapons, hardening their bones through repeated impact until they could shatter wood and crack ribs with a single strike. She read about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a system built almost entirely around the idea that a smaller, weaker person could defeat a larger, stronger one by taking the fight to the ground and using leverage and joint manipulation and chokes to force surrender. She read about Krav Maga, developed by a human military, designed not for sport, but for survival, a system with no rules and no honor that taught humans to target eyes, throats, groins, and joints with maximum aggression in minimum time. She read about wrestling traditions that were older than some galactic civilizations, about boxing, about judo, about kung fu and karate and sambo and dozens of others she could not even pronounce. And then she found the videos. She watched a human woman half the size of her male opponent sweep his legs, mount his back, and choke him unconscious in under 30 seconds. She watched a skinny human male with taped hands knock out a fighter twice his weight with a 5-eye single spinning kick to the head. She watched humans grapple on the ground with a ferocity and technical precision that made her claws extend involuntarily, her predator instincts screaming that what she was seeing was dangerous, deeply and fundamentally dangerous. Her fur stood on end for an hour straight. The next morning she found Lena in the cafeteria, eating something called oatmeal with a calm expression, and she sat down across from her and said, "Your species has been doing this to each other for how long?" Lena looked up. "Doing what?" "Fighting. Systematically, obsessively. turning unarmed combat into a science. For how long? Lena thought about it for a moment. As long as we have existed, she said. Talus stared at her. That is thousands of years. Closer to tens of thousands, depending on how you count it. Talus leaned forward, her voice dropping. Why is none of this in the Academy's combat database? Why does Instructor Vorath not know about any of this? Lena shrugged and took another bite of oatmeal. Nobody asked. 2 words, and they landed on Talus like a hammer, because she realized in that moment that the galaxy had looked at humans, seen soft skin and blunt teeth, and simply stopped looking. Nobody had asked, because nobody thought there was anything worth asking about. Meanwhile, Kale had chosen the opponent. His name was Roth Galen, and he was a Gorvan. 8 feet tall, 600 pounds of dense muscle layered over a skeleton reinforced with natural bone plating across his shoulders, forearms, and spine. Roth was young, strong, confident, and genuinely liked by most of the Academy. He was also kind, which made Kale's choice feel less like a punishment and more like a mercy, because Roth had already promised publicly that he would be gentle with the human and end it quickly so she would not be hurt too badly. Heard this. She did not react. Talus, however, looked at Lena with a new expression, something caught between fear and wonder, because she had spent the previous night watching humans do things with their bare hands that would haunt her dreams for weeks. He thinks he is being kind, Talus said quietly. He is being kind, Lena replied, and I respect that. I will try to be kind too. Talus blinked. What does that mean? Lena finished her oatmeal and stood up. It means I will end it quickly, so he will not be hurt too badly. She said it without arrogance, without bravado, the same way someone might say the sky is blue or water is wet. A simple fact, spoken by someone who had earned the right to state it. The night before the match, Lena sat alone on the roof of her dormitory building, legs dangling over the edge, staring up at alien constellations she had memorized but never learned to love the way she loved the stars back. Home. The air was cool and thin and tasted like copper, and somewhere far below her, the Academy hummed with energy and anticipation, and the quiet cruelty of a crowd that had already decided how this story would end. She flexed her hands in the starlight. Small hands, scarred across the knuckles, calloused on the palms. Hands that had been broken and healed and broken again. Hands that knew exactly what they could do. She whispered into the alien night, to no one and to everyone, words that only the wind could hear. They think we are soft because we bleed easy. They do not understand. We learn to fight because we bleed. The combat arena sat at the heart of the Academy like a stone fist buried in the earth. It was old, older than the current building around it, built in an age when the galactic species settled their disagreements with blood instead of treaties, and its circular walls rose 20 feet high before opening into tiered seating that could hold over 2,000 spectators. Every seat was full. Students pressed shoulder to shoulder, wing to wing, tentacle to tentacle, and those who could not find seats clung to the railings or hovered in the upper galleries using personal gravity units. The energy in the room was thick enough to taste excitement and curiosity, and beneath it all, the sharp electric hum of a crowd that had come to see something they believed would be quick and brutal and entertaining in the way that mismatches always are. In the upper balcony, seated in a chair carved from a single piece of dark stone, Commandant Zael Okori watched the arena, with all 4 of his arms folded across his chest. His ancient Caliph eyes, milky white with threads of gold, moved slowly across the crowd, reading the energy the way a sailor reads the sea. He said nothing. He did not need to. Kale Vorath stood at the edge of the ring, serving as both referee and commentator, his scaled body catching the overhead lights as he activated the holographic display system. Two profiles appeared in the air above the arena. On the left, Roth Galen. The numbers were staggering. 8 feet 2 inches tall, 614 pounds, bone density 47% above galactic sapient average. Estimated unarmed strike force exceeding 3,000 newtons. Natural bone plating covering 31% of his body surface. The crowd roared with approval. On the right, Lena Castillo. 5 feet 7 inches, 142 pounds, bone density within standard range for a mid-gravity. Primate species. No natural armor. No natural weaponry. Estimated unarmed strike force listed as negligible by comparative standards. A few students laughed, and the sound was not cruel exactly, but it was careless. The laughter of people who had already written the ending. Roth entered the ring first, and the ground shook slightly with each step. He was smiling, a broad, honest, friendly smile, because Roth was not a cruel person, and he genuinely did not want to hurt anyone. He raised one massive arm and waved to the crowd, and they cheered for him with real affection. Then Lena stepped into the ring. She came barefoot, wearing simple training clothes, a fitted dark top and loose pants, and her hands were wrapped in thin cloth strips, the kind human fighters had used for centuries. She looked small. Not just small compared to Roth, but small compared to everything, the arena, the crowd, the thousands of eyes watching her from species that could individually tear her apart without trying. She walked to the center of the ring and stood there, feet slightly apart, hands loose at her sides, and she looked up at Roth, the way a person looks at a mountain they have already decided to climb. Roth looked down at her, and his smile softened into something almost sad. "I will try to make this quick," he said quietly. "I do not want to hurt you." Lena nodded. "I know," she said. "I appreciate that." Cale stepped forward, raised one clawed hand, and brought it down. "Begin." Roth moved first. For a creature his size, he was shockingly fast. His right arm swung in a wide arc, aimed at Lena's midsection, a blow that carried enough force behind it to crack a concrete wall and send the fragments flying. Lena was not there. She shifted to the left, not a jump, not a dive, just a small, precise step, combined with a slight rotation of her torso, and Roth's fist passed through the air. Space, where she had been standing a half-second earlier. The crowd leaned forward. Roth swung again, faster this time. A straight punch aimed at her center mass. And again, Lena moved, just enough to let it pass. Her body turning like a door on a hinge, minimal and efficient and utterly calm. He struck a third time, a downward hammer fist that would have shattered bone, and Lena sidestepped it so closely that the wind from his arm ruffled her hair. The arena had gone quiet. Not silent. There were still whispers, still the rustle of bodies shifting in seats, but the laughter had stopped, and in its place was something new, something that felt like the first cold breeze before a storm. Lena was not running. She was not cowering or dodging desperately or looking for a way out of the ring. She was circling, and her eyes were locked on Roth with an intensity that several predator species in the audience recognized on an instinctive level. Of something that was hunting. Then she struck. Her right leg snapped forward in a low kick that connected with the inside of Roth's left knee. Not the bone-plated front of the joint, but the soft tissue behind it, where tendons and ligaments did their quiet, essential work, unprotected by armor. Roth's leg buckled. Not much, he was too strong for that, but enough to shift his weight, enough to break his stance for 1 second, and 1 second was all Lena needed. She flowed into him like water pouring through a crack, closing the distance between them so fast that the sensors tracking the match registered her movement as a blur. An elbow strike to his exposed ribs, angled upward between the bone plates, driven by her hips and her whole rotating body. Not power from her arms, but power from the ground, traveling up through her feet and legs and core, and into a point no bigger than 2 square inches. Roth grunted, the first sound of pain anyone had ever heard from him in a sparring match. A palm strike to his throat, precise and controlled, not enough to crush, but enough to shock, enough to make his body flinch and his arms rise instinctively to protect his neck. And then a spinning knee to his unguarded right side, landing just below the ribs, where the bone plating ended and soft tissue began, and the impact echoed through the silent arena like a drum. Roth staggered sideways, and for the first time there was something in his eyes that was not confidence, not fear, not yet, but surprise, real and deep and growing. He roared and lunged, both arms sweeping inward to grab her, and his hands were so large that when they closed around her torso, his fingers nearly met at her spine. The crowd surged to its feet. He had her. 600 pounds of muscle and bone had wrapped around 140 pounds of human, and every biological metric said this was over. Lena did not panic, moved with the grab instead of against it, absorbing the momentum like a reed ending in wind. And in the half-second before his grip fully tightened, she drove both forearms down against his wrists, while dropping her center of gravity so sharply that her weight seemed to double. It was a clinch escape, perfected over centuries by human fighters, who had faced opponents bigger and stronger than themselves in every generation for thousands of years. She broke free, hooked her right foot behind his left ankle, planted her shoulder against his hip, and pushed. Roth went down. The sound of 600 pounds hitting the arena floor was like a small explosion, and the shockwave rippled through the stone beneath the feet of every spectator. The arena was silent now, truly silent, the kind of silence that happens when thousands of minds try to process something that should not be possible. On the ground, Lena transformed. She was no longer the small, quiet student from the back row. She moved across Roth's massive body with terrifying precision, transitioning from position to position, mount to side control to back control, each shift exploiting his attempts to rise, each movement using his own strength and size against him. Roth thrashed, and he was powerful beyond measure. But every time he pushed, she pulled. Every time he turned, she was already behind him. And every gap in his armor she found, with elbows and knees and the hard edges of her forearms. She took his back, wrapped her legs around his waist, locked her heels against his hips, and slid her right arm under his chin. A rear-naked choke, one of the oldest submissions in human grappling, designed not to crush the windpipe, but to compress the arteries on both sides of the neck, cutting blood flow to the brain with surgical precision. Roth reached up to pull her arm away, but her grip was locked in deep, reinforced by her left hand clasping her right bicep, her entire body working as a single unified mechanism of leverage and pressure. His movements slowed. His hands dropped. He tapped the mat 3 times with his open palm. It was over. The arena held its breath for 3 full seconds, and then from the upper balcony came a sound that cut through the silence like a blade. Commandant Zalakori was clapping, all 4 hands, slow and deliberate, and the sound echoed through the stone chamber like thunder from a clear sky. Lena released the choke immediately and helped Roth sit up. He stared at her, breathing hard, his eyes wide, with something that looked like wonder. "What was that?" he asked. Lena offered him her hand to help him stand. "About 4,000 years of practice," she said. Roth took her hand and rose, towering over her once again. And then he did something that nobody expected. He bowed, deep and low, in the Gorvan tradition of honoring a warrior who has proven themselves in combat. The crowd erupted. At the edge of the ring, Kale Vorath stood perfectly still, his lecture notes still projected on the holographic screen behind him, the species combat hierarchy still glowing in its neat ranked columns, with human sitting at the very bottom. His face was unreadable, but his claws had retracted fully into his fingers, something that only happened in Draythan, when they were in the presence of a predator they recognized as equal or greater. He was not aware he had done it. The footage hit the galactic network within an hour of the match ending, and within 6 hours, it had been viewed over 90 million times across 400 star systems. The title that someone had attached to the clip translated roughly, in most galactic languages, to "Human Female Defeats Gorvan Barehanded," and the comment sections beneath it became war zones of disbelief, fascination, and fear. Military analysts from 7 different species governments requested the full unedited recording. The Draythan Combat Authority issued a formal inquiry asking whether the footage had been altered. The Felisari Predator Studies Institute published an emergency bulletin reclassifying humans from tool-dependent omnivore to adaptive apex threat, further study required. And at the Academy itself, the ripples from that single fight spread through every department, every dormitory, and every conversation like cracks spreading through glass. Kale Vorath sat alone in his office the evening after the match. The lights dimmed low. The holographic display on his desk showing the human combat footage that Talus had unearthed from Earth's archives. He watched a human male from a place called Thailand deliver a series of elbow strikes to a padded target, with enough focused force to fracture bone. And the technique was so clean, so refined, that Kale found himself leaning forward, with the same intensity he reserved for studying the combat forms of his own species. He watched a woman from a place called Brazil wrap herself around an opponent twice her size on a ground mat, shifting and adjusting with a patience and technical precision that looked less like fighting and more like a predator slowly digesting its prey. He watched footage from something called the Octagon, where humans fought each other inside a cage, and the crowd around them screamed with a hunger that Kale recognized because it was the same hunger that burned in him. The arenas of his own homeworld. And he watched all of this with a feeling he had not experienced in a very long time. The cold, uncomfortable weight of knowing he had been wrong. Not just mistaken, wrong. He had looked at the data, trusted the biology, and made his judgment, and at no point had it occurred to him that combat ability could be something a species built instead of something a species was born with. The next morning, he sent a private message to Lena requesting a meeting, and he made it clear that this was not an instructor summoning a student, but a warrior asking to speak with another warrior. They met in his office, and Kale did not sit behind his desk, but instead sat across from her in a chair that was too small for his frame, his claws retracted, his posture open. "I owe you an acknowledgement," he said, and the words came slowly, because humility was not something the Draythan practiced often. Lena sat with her hands folded in her lap and waited. "I was wrong," Kale said, "not just about the rankings, but about the framework itself. I measured your species by what evolution gave you and ignored what you gave yourselves, and that is a failure of analysis that I should not have made." Lena studied his face for a moment before she spoke. "Your framework made sense for every other species," she said, "because for most species, biology is destiny. The Draythan are dangerous because they were born dangerous. The Gorvan are powerful because their bones grew thick and their muscles grew dense, and for every one of them, combat ability is a gift they received from their genetics." She paused. "Humans did not receive that gift. We were born soft and slow and breakable on a planet that was trying to kill us every single day. And so we did the only thing we could do. We learned." Kale leaned forward. "Learned what, exactly?" "Everything," Lena said simply. "We learned to strike, and we learned to grapple, and we learned to choke, and we learned to throw. We learned where the body is weak and how to exploit those weaknesses with maximum efficiency and minimum energy. We learned that size can be defeated by leverage, that strength can be defeated by technique, that armor can be bypassed if you know where to look." She held up her hands, small, scarred, wrapped in the thin cloth she always wore during training. Every martial art our species ever created was born from the same situation. Someone smaller and weaker, standing in front of something bigger and stronger, and refusing to die. She lowered her hands. That is not a weakness, instructor. That is 10,000 years of problem-solving under pressure. And it never stopped, not for a single generation. Kale was quiet for a long time after that. And when he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, stripped of the performance and authority he wore in there. Classroom? I think I understand now, he said, why the Galactic Council has been so cautious about humanity. Lena tilted her head. What do you mean? They see your technology and they are impressed, Kale said. They see your diplomacy and they are reassured. But somewhere in the parts of the Council that deal with threat assessment and long-term strategic planning, someone looked at your species and saw what I did not see until you put Roth Galen on the ground. And what is that? Kale met her eyes, and for the first time Lena saw something in his expression that was not pride or authority, but genuine respect. The deep, earned kind that warriors carry like scars. That humans do not need weapons to be dangerous, he said. That you are dangerous by choice, by will, by thousands of years of relentless self-improvement, and that no amount of biological advantage can protect against a species that has spent its entire existence learning how to defeat things that should be able to destroy it. While Kale and Lena were having their conversation, Talus was making waves of her own. She had spent 3 sleepless nights compiling her research into a formal academic paper titled Unarmed Combat Traditions of Earth, a Xenological Survey, and she had submitted it to the Academy's academic network with the quiet hope that a few dozen students might read it. Within 48 hours, it became the most downloaded document in the Academy's history. The paper cataloged over 200 distinct human martial arts traditions, organized by region, philosophy, and tactical approach, and it included comparative analysis showing how each system addressed the fundamental problem that defined human combat: how to survive when your body is not built for fighting. The Felisari students were particularly shaken by the paper, because they were a predator species with natural claws and fangs, and fast-twitch muscle. Fiber. And they had always assumed that their predatory biology placed them near the top of any combat ranking. But Talus's paper showed them something unsettling. Humans had developed multiple fighting systems specifically designed to defeat predators, to neutralize claws by controlling the limbs, to avoid fangs by attacking from angles that kept the head controlled, to use a predator's aggression against it by redirecting force and exploiting overcommitment. That was not prey behavior. That was something else entirely. Something that did not fit neatly into any ecological category the galaxy had ever used. Commandant Zale summoned Lena to his office on the 4th day after the match. His office was high in the central tower, a circular room with windows that looked out over the academy in every direction. And the old Caliph stood at the window, with 2 of his forearms clasped behind his back, and the other 2 resting on the stone ledge. "Been alive for over 300 years, he said without turning around, and in that time I have watched the rise and integration of 11 new species into the galactic community. Each one brought something unique, something that defined them. The Valathi brought their music, the Krethali brought their medicine, the Gorvan brought their engineering." He turned to face her, and his ancient eyes held a light that was both warm and sharp. "Humans are the first species I have encountered whose defining trait is not something they have, but something they do. You adapt, constantly, relentlessly, in every domain, and what happened in that arena was not a fight. It was a demonstration of what adaptability looks like when it is applied to violence over 10,000 unbroken years." He paused. "I would like you to co-instruct a new elective course, Human Combat Doctrine and Adaptive Warfare, alongside Instructor Vorath. Teach?" "I want the galaxy to learn," Jael said, "because the lesson you delivered in that ring is bigger than fighting. It is about what happens when a species refuses to accept its limitations. Lena was quiet for a moment, and then she nodded. I will do it. That evening, Kale Vorath stood alone in the amphitheater where he had given the lecture that started all of this, and he stared at the holographic species combat hierarchy that still glowed on the display wall. He reached out with one clawed hand and deleted the entire ranking system. In its place, he created a new framework, a new way of understanding combat potential that accounted not just for biology, but for culture, training, philosophy, and will. Under the entry for humans, he wrote a single line that would eventually be quoted in military briefings across the galaxy for decades to come. Do not engage unarmed. They have been preparing for you longer than your species has existed. He stared at those words for a long time, then turned off the display and walked out into the corridor, where the sound of his claws clicking against the stone floor seemed somehow quieter than before. 6 months had passed since the fight in the arena, and the academy was not the same place it had been before. It looked the same from the outside. The twin spires still caught the morning light, the dormitory halls still hummed with the noise of 1,000 students from 100 worlds, and the combat training rooms still echoed with the sounds of sparring and instruction. But something had shifted beneath the surface, something quiet and deep and irreversible, like a river that had found a new path and would never return to the old one. Lena's elective course, Human Combat Doctrine and Adaptive Warfare, had started with 32 students in its first session. By the third week, it had over 200, and the academy had to move it to the main amphitheater just to fit everyone in. Species that had spent millennia relying on their natural advantages lined up to learn techniques invented by a species that had none. And the irony of this was not lost on anyone. Dreathan students with armored hides and retractable claws practiced hip throws and joint locks, learning to use leverage instead of brute force, discovering that their own massive frames could be turned against them by an opponent who understood angles and timing. Krethali students with venomous spines learned that their reliance on their toxins had made them predictable, that an opponent who anticipated the spine deployment could close the distance and neutralize the threat before it was ever used. Felisari students, fast, agile, predatory, found that human striking arts matched their natural speed and added a layer of tactical structure that their instinct-driven combat style had always lacked. And the Gorvan, massive and powerful and used to winning every physical contest by sheer overwhelming force, discovered something that humbled them in a way nothing else ever had. That humans had invented an entire discipline of combat, ground fighting, that was specifically designed to make size and strength meaningless. Lena taught the way she did everything else, quietly, patiently, without spectacle. She did not lecture about human superiority or make speeches about the indomitable spirit of her species. She just showed up every day, demonstrated the techniques with clean precision, corrected mistakes with a gentle hand on a wrist or a tap on a shoulder, and treated every student as if they were capable of learning anything she could teach. Her most surprising student was Roth Galen. The massive Gorvan had appeared at her first class without announcement, standing in the back row with his arms crossed and his expression serious. And when Lena asked if he wanted to participate, he had simply nodded and said, "I want to understand what happened to me." Within a month, he had become her best student and her primary sparring partner. And the sight of them training together, the enormous Gorvan and the small human woman moving around each other with practiced ease, became one of the most familiar images at the academy. Their friendship surprised everyone except them. Roth had told Lena during one of their early training sessions that losing to her in the arena had been the most important moment of his life. Not because it embarrassed him, but because it showed him that everything he believed about strength was incomplete. "I thought being strong meant being big," he said. I thought power came from mass and density and the ability to hit harder than the thing in front of you. But you showed me that power is also knowledge, also patience, also the willingness to study your own weaknesses instead of hiding behind your strengths. Lena had listened to this and then made him practice guard passes for another hour, because she believed in showing respect through expectation rather than through words. Kale Vorath attended Lena's classes regularly, back of the amphitheater, with a datapad in his clawed hands, taking notes with the focused attention of a scholar who had discovered a field he had not known existed. He had restructured his own comparative xenocombat studies curriculum around the new framework, combat potential as a product of culture and training rather than biology. And his lectures now began not with species rankings, but with a question that he posed to every new class. What is the most dangerous thing in this room? The students would look around at each other, at the claws and spines and armored hides and massive frames, and give their answers based on what they could see. And Kale would wait until they were done, then point to his own head and say, "This, the mind, the ability to learn and adapt and choose how to fight instead of being limited by how you were born. That is the most dangerous thing in any room, in any arena, on any battlefield in the galaxy." Taught me that lesson had no claws and no armor and weighed less than my left arm. The students would go quiet every time, and that silence was the sound of understanding beginning. The annual Grand Assembly arrived on a cold morning near the end of the academic cycle, when the Academy gathered its entire population, students, faculty, staff, and visiting dignitaries, into the Great Hall for a ceremony of recognition and reflection. The Great Hall was the largest enclosed space on campus, a vast domed chamber with walls of living stone that shifted color with the time of day. And on this morning it glowed a deep gold that made everything inside it look like it was carved from light. Over 3,000 beings filled the hall, standing in concentric rings around a central stage, and the air was thick with the quiet electric energy of so many different species breathing and shifting and waiting together. Commandant Zale Okori ascended the stage with the slow, deliberate grace of a being who had measured time in centuries. His forearms folded in the formal posture of address, his ancient eyes scanning the assembly with the same patient attention he gave to everything. He spoke in the common tongue, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall without amplification, resonant and deep and warm. "The purpose of this academy," he began, "has never been to rank the species of the galaxy. It has never been to determine which of us is strongest or fastest or most lethal. It has been from its founding a place where we come to understand each other, not through data or statistics, but through the harder work of actually paying attention." He paused, and 3,000 beings held their breath. This year, the most important lesson taught at this academy did not come from a textbook or a simulation or a lecture prepared by one of our distinguished faculty members. Where the human student stood, and his expression carried something that looked very much like gratitude. It came from a quiet student in the back row of a classroom who raised her hand and said 3 words that changed the way this institution understands combat, strength, and the nature of what makes a species dangerous. Another pause, longer this time, letting the silence do its work. She said, "I challenge that." The hall was utterly still. "Miss Lena Castillo, would you please join me?" Lena stepped out of the crowd and walked to the stage, and she walked the way she always walked, steady, unhurried, without any attempt to make herself look larger or more impressive than she was. She climbed the steps and stood beside the commandant, a small human woman on a stage designed for beings 3 times her size, and she looked out at the sea of alien faces without flinching. Zyle stepped aside and gave her the floor, waited. Lena stood in the silence for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, and carried the same quiet certainty that had filled the amphitheater on the day she first raised her hand. "Humans are not the strongest species in this room," she said. "We are not the fastest. We do not have armor or venom or claws. If you measured us purely by what our bodies can do, we would rank near the bottom of almost every physical category you could name." She looked across the hall, meeting eyes with Draythan and Gorvan and Felisari and Crethali and dozens of others she had come to know over the past months. "But we have something that I think every species in this room should understand." The silence deepened. "We never stop figuring out how to win. Not because we love fighting, though some of us do, and not because we are violent by nature, though we can be. We never stop, because for us, on our world, giving up was never an option." Took a breath. "Our planet tried to kill us every day for 200,000 years. With cold, with heat, with predators that were faster and stronger and better equipped than we were. With diseases we could not see and disasters we could not predict. And we survived. Not because we were built to survive, but because we refused to stop learning, refused to stop adapting, refused to accept that the things trying to kill us were stronger than our ability to figure them out." She paused and let her gaze settle on the front rows where the youngest students stood with wide eyes. "That is what I want you to understand about humans. Our greatest weapon is not in our hands. It is in our refusal to believe that we cannot win. And in the thousands of generations who turned that refusal into knowledge and passed it down to the next, and the next, and the next, until it became something that looks like instinct, but is really just stubbornness refined into an art." She stepped back from the edge of the stage. "We are small and soft, and we bruise if you look at us wrong, but we are still here, and we intend to stay." The silence held for one heartbeat, then two, then three, and then the ovation began. It started in the back rows, with Roth Galen bringing his enormous hands together with a sound like thunder, and it spread forward through the assembly like a wave breaking across a shore. Draythan clapping their claws against their chest plates in the warrior salute. Felisari stamping their feet in the feline rhythm of deep respect. Crethali clicking their spines in the harmonic pattern that their species reserved for moments of genuine awe. 3,000 beings from 100 worlds standing and making noise for a single human woman who weighed 140 pounds and had no claws and no armor and no venom and absolutely nothing to prove. In the crowd, Talis Venri watched with tears running down her silver-blue fur, and she turned to the Crethali students standing beside her and whispered through the noise, "And they call themselves soft." The Crethali student, whose venomous spines had been retracted unconsciously in Lena's presence for weeks, and who had only recently realized why, looked at Talis with an expression that mixed admiration and something very close to fear. "They are the most terrifying species in the galaxy," he said, his voice barely audible beneath the roar of the crowd, "and they do not even know it." In the upper balcony, Commandant Cielo Corey stood with all four arms at his sides, watching the human woman on the stage below him receive the loudest ovation the Academy had produced in his 3 centuries of leadership. He smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had just watched the galaxy learn something it should have learned a long time ago. On the stage, Lena Castillo stood still and let the sound wash over her. The cheers of 1,000 species who had looked at humanity and seen weakness for as long as anyone could remember, and who were now, finally, looking again. She did not bow. She did not wave. She just stood there, small and steady and unbreakable, the way humans had always stood, in the path of everything that should have destroyed them, still breathing, still fighting, still refusing to fall. And somewhere far away, on a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, the species that had crawled out of the mud and taught itself to touch the sky continued to do what it had always done. It kept going.